Well, that is what the government is hoping for, that all of the measures that it has put together in its draft aviation policy will increase traffic fourfold over the next several years. Joining us now to take us through what the industry makes of this, let's first up go across to Ajay Singh of SpiceJet. We've also got with us Pitek Yeo of Vistara, and Mithu Chandalia of AirAsia will join us in just a bit. But Ajay Singh, let me start by asking you, do you believe that the push for regional connectivity is the biggest positive outcome as far as this draft aviation policy is concerned?
I think several high points, one of which of course is regional connectivity. And as you know that we've always been great supporters of regional connectivity. I think it's a shame that of the 475 airports we have today, only 75 are operational. There's great growth happening in the economies in small towns, the tier 2 and tier 3 and other smaller towns. And I think if we can provide them air connectivity, you would see a multiplication of that growth, both in terms of their economy and in terms of tourism. So I think the focus on regional connectivity is a good one. I think there are several other highlights, like what they've done in terms of trying to reduce the cost and make MROs more viable and enable airlines in India to use those MROs. The ease of doing business, air cargo, and several initiatives, I think, which are pretty good.
I'll talk to you about the changes that they brought in as far as the MROs are concerned in just a bit. If I may continue our conversation as far as regional connectivity is concerned, and I wanted to ask you what you make of the regional connectivity scheme and that viability gap fund that the government is proposing to set up, and also this business of capping fares at 2,500 rupees per hour, because I understand that the cost is actually 4,000 rupees. Is it a sensible way to actually approach this idea by way of a cap, or let the market decide and let competitive forces decide?
I think this idea of putting in place a regional connectivity fund is a good one. A similar scheme was used when they wanted to build the highway development project in way back in Mr. Vajpayee's time, and a cess was put on petrol, and that money was used to fund the construction of national highways. So I think the idea of a regional connectivity fund is a good one. I don't necessarily agree with this capping of fares at 2,500 rupees. Because when you set a cap, you also need to start setting floors, and when you set floors, then fares don't remain dynamic, and all the stimulation that we do by offering fares at 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees, and the ability that gives to people to start flying, people who have never flown before, and the expansion of the market that happens as a consequence, I think that stops to happen. So I think government should stay away from capping fares. I think they can set up this fund, they can provide viability gap funding wherever required, and they can use the money to develop airports. But I think they should let airlines determine fares by themselves. This dynamic fare model has worked pretty well so far, and the market is growing at 20%, can grow faster as well. But I think capping of fares would act as an impediment to the growth.
So they have invited public comments, and you would clearly, in your public comments, state to the regulator as well as the government that capping of fares is a bad idea. Would it, if this does indeed go through, Mr. Singh, will it deter your regional connectivity plans?
Well, I think overall it's a good policy and should help encourage regional connectivity. Perhaps if they can clarify that instead of a cap, this would be an average fare, which in addition to the viability gap funding, the airlines are able to charge. Perhaps in some sectors where there are no flights available, it could become viable for airlines to offer flights. But all in all, I think the policy is actually a good one as far as regional connectivity is concerned. And as you said, it's a draft policy. They have invited comments, and we will address comments to them. And given the fact that SpiceJet is the largest regional player in the market today, we have 15 aircraft, by far the largest number of flights into small destinations. I think that we should be able to persuade the government to look at what we are saying seriously.